Welcome and thank you for joining us today during Safety and Health Week 2021. I am Sue Freeman, the Outreach Program Manager for the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, CCOHS. Today we have with us Peter Neufeld, Vice President of Leadership, and Raf Bartkow, Manager of Learning and Development, both joining us from Maple Leaf Foods. Welcome to you both, and thank you for being here, Peter and Raf.
Great. Thank you so much, Sue. And folks, great to connect with you this way. I think we've all gotten pretty used to these types of calls by now, and I've been amazed. I've been on so many, and I'm always surprised at the level of connection you can even feel through the technology. But the way that I think it really works best is when we make use of the chat. So you will notice there is the chat feature and a Q&A feature here. And I just encourage you to interact that way. Raf and I have some content that we'll be going through today, but what we really want to be able to do is get into hear from you. So as much as we're going to present, we're also going to get into time for Q&A at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Go ahead. Yeah. I just wanted to do a brief little bit of housekeeping, but fabulous. And the fact that you're going to be leading us through the Maple Leaf journey and the ins and outs of your mental health initiatives and your work and program related metrics and your organization's responses to COVID-19 pandemic, all from an employer's perspective. So we're going to hear these tips today. And as Peter was saying, and Raf will share as well, lots of time for questions, answers, chat. So get in on it because we're going to learn about how to prioritize mental health and well-being in your workplace. So take it away, Raf and Peter. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks again. So what we're going to cover today, and like we say, I think to frame it up, probably in the next 30 minutes, we'll cover information and then allow time for open Q&A at the end. But if you have questions along the way, put them in the chat and we'll get to them as we go. As Sue said, we want to talk about Maple Leaf's story. And there's a lot of different organizations who have done work, you know, in the mental health space already and are much further along in their journey. And then I'd recognize there are some who are just actually considering doing this work, and probably COVID has kind of expedited your interest in doing work. So I think Maple Leaf, when you look at those bookends, we're probably more in the middle. You know, we've been at this for probably a year of prep and a year of execution. So we're still closer to the beginning than we are kind of to an end. But what we want to do today is kind of share our experience and hopefully you find it useful for yourself. What we'll cover is we're going to talk about some key milestones and kind of the way that we framed up the initiative. We're going to get into our execution, and the execution definitely took a turn. Like a lot of us in March 2021, there was significant change, and we'll share how we had to pivot in a very significant way compared to what we had planned on launching, you know, earlier that year. We'll talk about some of the new initiatives we brought forward to address COVID and the broader concerns. And now, as I've said, we're a year under our belt. We're starting to see the metrics, and we're able to start to see kind of the impact that the initiative is having on the organization. This will always be a process of continuous learning, and we're quite excited that we're able to kind of find out what those early metrics are and recognize what's working and where we need to adjust. That's our plan. Now, when you look at the slide here, these are our strategic goals that we identified in 2018. And it's always amazing kind of when you look at a strategy and you're like, wow, well, that's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I don't imagine that took them more than 10 minutes to write. It's actually a distillation, you know, and Raf's smiling, of probably like 6 to 9 months worth of work to help us to really determine where we were going to play and what our strategy would look like. we had, in terms of our organization, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Maple Leaf Foods. I imagine a lot of you have eaten our bacon or our hot dogs or our other products. But we have a goal to be and a vision to be the most sustainable protein company on earth. And so that's a pretty robust goal. We're very clear in terms of the idea about being a protein company, because a significant part of our product line now is plant-based. So like many other organizations, we've moved from being straight meat products to expanding what we can be doing with plant. And that's a really exciting and growing part of our portfolio. But the first part of that sentence is about being the most sustainable protein company on earth. And when we're looking at sustainability, we're looking at animal welfare in terms of wanting to be world leaders in terms of the way that we treat the animals. We're looking at our sustainability in terms of how we use resources that we use, our electricity, our water, all of the different resources that go into making food. Other parts, though, is that we're very interested in terms of looking at how we interact with our communities. And a lot of organizations talk about, social responsibility. We take more of a lens in terms of looking at shared value. And shared value, if you're interested, and you can look at some of the work coming out of Harvard in this area, but it's really where the business model is focused in a sustainable way, that it's not just the primacy of our financial stakeholders, but it's the stakeholders of our employees and also the communities that we operate in. And it's this last part, in terms of looking at the communities that we operate in and our employees, that really had an impetus to say we needed to do something on this side. When you're looking at mental health, we had the advantage in our organization. Our CEO is Michael McCain, and he has kind of outside of work, and his family has shown a strong interest in mental health, and done a lot of work in partnership with CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. But he had this idea of saying, okay, I'm interested in it externally. What are we doing in terms of supporting and living these values within our own organization? And so he had sent me an email, probably 2 years ago now, and said, I want to do something in this space. Let's talk and figure out what we could do. For me, it was like, it put a huge smile on my face, the opportunity to do this. I work in HR now, but I used to be a full-time therapist. And so I did grad studies in psychology, and I worked as a therapist full-time at Peel Memorial Hospital, now called William Osler Hospital, in an addictions unit. And so the opportunity to go back and be able to do mental health and be able to support people in this way was very exciting for me. So I didn't miss a beat to be able to say, okay, let's see what's possible. When we formed the team, though, what we really wanted to do was make sure that we were really thoughtful in terms of understanding what are the needs of our people. And so and Raf's going to get into more details in terms of what we learned from that process. But we formed a core team to do this work. And the core team was made up of people. First, we had some people within human resources. We also had people in employee health and safety. And then we also had people representing our corporate and our plant office. And when you're looking at our organization, we're roughly 13,000 employees, primarily in Canada, but we do have 2 facilities in the US. And about 10,000 of those people are hourly, so they're working in our facilities, and the remainder are more salaried, or what you might call management or corporate. So it's a very diverse organization. With a lot of complexity and a lot of geographic dispersion. And so what we wanted to do was be able to say, okay, let's have representatives from these different areas who would be on our core team. So that was kind of the starting point. What we also did, though, and I'm talking more at this assessment side, is we partnered with CAMH, and I mentioned them a moment ago. CAMH, probably most people think of CAMH as being a service provider for mental health services. And obviously that's what they do at the highest level. And they're also a research arm equipping other service providers to provide the best treatment. What you might not be aware of is they have a small consulting group. And that consulting group, I think it's grown. We were one of their early clients, and I think it grew very much over time. But we contacted them, and they became an invaluable partner for us to be able to help us to frame up the work that we were doing. And so they helped in terms of giving guidance, in terms of framing up a strategy, and then really supporting us in terms of reaching out to the organization to see what we could learn. When you're thinking in terms of the goals, though, that we arrived at, this first one is to create a psychologically healthy and safe workplace for all employees. And that sentence says a lot. Our intention at the beginning had been very much that we were going to be, so this is an end state, so it's meant to be a 3 to 5 year strategy. But we planned at the beginning to focus on people who were having acute mental health problems. We wanted to help those who needed the help the most. So they could be people who are going through depressive episodes. It could be someone who was finding that their anxiety had become starting to impact their employment. It could be an individual dealing with addiction. So we wanted to help at the beginning with people who had the most acute, mental health challenges. And then in year 2, we were going to be moving more to the wellness space. We'll get to in a minute, but with COVID, what we recognize is that we had to pivot very significantly away from that and start to get into the wellness quickly. The other part of our analysis is really around becoming a leader and collaborator for advancing mental health. The reason I think that this is really important that we highlight this aspect is we don't want mental health and our initiative here to be a competitive advantage for our organization. And that can sound really odd. We're a competitive organization. Consumer product goods is a competitive field. But this is not the space that we actually want to be competing with our peers and with other organizations in. This is really the idea about lifting the tide for everyone. And so our intention is, and why we participate in meetings like this and learn so much from others, is that we want to be able to start to raise the understanding about mental health throughout all our organizations. And we believe that Canada and all the countries that we operate in, the tide will rise for everyone when we share and make improvements in that area. So that kind of gives you the sense in terms of kind of what we were looking at in terms of strategy. Raf, if you can go to I'm going to pass it over to Raf now. He's going to talk more about the next slide and what we learned.
Thank you, Peter. So as you can see, we have the 3 key milestones at the bottom of this slide. So our first step was an internal needs assessment. And I'm trying to advance the slide now. There it is. So as Peter mentioned, we have partnered with CAMH. And as a first step, CAMH facilitated focus groups for us. So it was very important for us to really understand the current state at that time. So CAMH facilitated 12 focus groups at Maple Leaf Foods, 4 at our head office and 8 at our various production facilities across the country. So in total, we received feedback from a diverse sample size of 140 team members. 48% of them were people leaders and 52% were individual contributors. What we were curious about in focus groups were 3 things. What is working now, so the current state, so what should we continue doing? What is the desired state? And then the third thing is, how do we get there? And we really wanted to collect ideas from our people. It was very important that we co-create this initiative with our team members. So as a result, what you can see on this slide, the top row, it's a summary, not a complete summary, of over 650 ideas or tactics that we collected from our people in focus groups. And then what our team has done was a cost and impact analysis. And we had a very strategic approach. So Peter mentioned the goals, and then we looked at the 650 tactics And we had to decide which of these tactics will help us achieve the goals that we had set for ourselves. And what are the things that we will do, and then also what are the things that we are comfortable letting go of, and the things that we will not be doing. So really focusing on the things that we want to do, the things that will have the biggest impact in our culture. We also started talking about mental health at our organization, and we organized Bell Let's Talk events, and I'm sure everyone is familiar in Canada with Bell Let's Talk. What you see here is a conversation bubble, which is part of Bell's toolkit. We printed it out. It was a big poster that at that time was put in our lobby of our head office. And Bell Let's Talk. So we asked our people, what would you like to tell us about mental health? What is it that we should focus on? And as you can see, people filled in a lot of wonderful things, and we were looking at themes. So what you can see are some highlighted themes that we saw here. So quite a few people talked about being supportive, creating a supportive environment. And then a few people talked about not being alone. I am not alone, you are not alone, no one is alone here. So what we decided to do is we used this tagline, so you are not alone, and that became a slogan for our mental health initiative. So Peter will now describe our initiative on one page and share with you the things that we have ultimately decided to do.
Great, thanks, Raf. So as Raf indicated, we were amazed in terms of the engagement across our organization in terms of ideas. And the challenge always when you're building a strategy is saying, okay, how do you actually distill this into the most salient things that we think will resonate with people, and also be something that we had good confidence that we could actually deliver on. So we came up with this slide that you see here. I'll orient you to the slide. If you're looking at the top of the slide and you've got a line down there in the middle, kind of going right through everybody's abdomen, at the top there are the things that are for our people. We recognize that in mental health, it's just so important that people understand you probably heard of the WIFM. What's in it for me? And so these are the areas in terms of what the benefits are that people could quickly see that would help them. The bottom parts are in terms of what we want to do to create the culture where people would thrive. And so those are the elements that we looked more at systemically across our organization, the programs, the processes that we put into place, and the culture to be able to help people to be successful. So if you're looking at the top left, ease of access to effective supports. And we'll go through what those supports are in a moment. What we had kind of going into this program, though, was a typical FAP program, which is totally acceptable, but we didn't believe it was robust enough. And so what we wanted to do is increase the number of offerings that people had to be able to get help. And we'll show you what those are, because I think it's quite exciting in terms of what we were able to curate. And then we'll talk about kind of the benefits that we saw. We also wanted to create high awareness of how to access the supports. It was funny because at the very beginning, and I'll disclose, at the same time that we were doing this, somebody in my family needed some support. So I went online with EFAP, and I didn't even know how to navigate it. And here I was in HR having my own experience, and I was like, this is really challenging in terms of being able to navigate. And so what we wanted to do, we thought the last thing that we want for someone who is experiencing a challenging psychological time to be able to be stymied in terms of their ability to find what they need. The accommodation part is something that we've really leaned into in terms of how we're supporting people with best-in-class accommodation. So this is how we treat people when they're on the job. This is how we treat people in terms of gradual return to the work, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with those. But where we leaned in is we did more around the idea of communicating during the leave. I'll give you an example of when someone is going through, a depressive episode and they're on leave. It can be a terribly isolating time. And often when someone goes on a leave for, let's say, another physical ailment, you know, they'll have a doctor's note, they'll leave, and then we don't talk to them. We wait until the doctor says they're ready to return, and then we look at the return to work. What they found and what the research is showing is that type of isolation that people have during a mental health leave can actually be detrimental. The person's world becomes much smaller at that time, and then the anxiety can become quite devastating when they're thinking about returning to work. And so we did a lot of work around accommodation and the way that we interact with people, taking the lead from them, but while they're on leave, with the sole intention of supporting their mental well-being. The bottom right, we have training and education. We've done mandatory training for all of our people leaders to be trained on mental health. In our instance, we worked with Morneau Chappelle, and we worked with the person who actually supported Bell in their Let's Talk events, and we did mandatory training for all of our people leaders. Stop the stigma, and I've said it last, but this is really the cultural element. And Raf's going to get into some of the things that we've done to stop the stigma, but I think this is the really kind of a really critical starting point to help people to feel your organization is a safe place to even look at these things. Now I'm going to move forward to some of the supports that we have. So I'll do this quite quickly, but in terms of looking at the supports, and this is a little bit of a roadmap for people. So they access this through our intranet. They go to our HR site, and then they can click on mental health, and they can see what's available for them. As you can see, we have some things that are available for our salaried and hourly, and some for our hourly only. Morneau Chappelle, and this really wasn't an education for us. They've been a tremendous partner. They did some ROI work for us, which was essential, because what we did is we increased the paramedical spend that people had in our organization. We benchmarked what people were getting, you know, currently what we had and how it compared to the external market. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, we were kind of at benchmark, but the benchmark was quite pathetic. I will say that, and I don't use that term, you know, lightly. But it was only $300 if you took the maximum program, $500 per year in terms of support for paramedical. And if you've had experience in terms of needing therapy, a typical, you know, treatment modality, let's say it was for anxiety or depression, you'd usually be a minimum of 10 sessions. One session is usually $200. So basically we're saying we're going to pay for 2.5 counseling sessions, and the other 8.5 are up to you. So what we did with the help of Morneau for doing ROI was we did you know, an analysis to say how much risk are we leaning into to be able to increase our paramedical. And in our case, what you can see under Sun Life is we increased our paramedical to $1,500. Our intention, so that's basically, you know, getting people about 3/4 of the way through if they have a typical 10, you know, counseling session experience. Our intention is not at all that this is going to be a money maker for Maple Leaf in terms of reduce SDIs, reduce absenteeism. What we want to be able to do, as we, ideally this program would be self-funding, is that as we find those benefits, and we will get to them because we're starting to see them, we're able to funnel some of that money back into these programs and be able to offer even more support in some of these key areas. So orienting you quickly to kind of what we have here. The way that I frame it up, I think of Morneau Chappelle in terms of the you know, family assistance counseling. This is when you have an urgent critical need. They are amazing at supporting people very quickly with those urgent types of needs. What I would say though is a lot of people need help that goes beyond that. So if they decide they want to see their own therapist, they tap into Sun Life with our paramedical. but we have the two programs in the middle that we found to be extremely helpful. Inkblot is, if you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to check them out. They're online video counseling. So it's just like we're doing here. You're meeting with a professional counselor, and we pay for people to be able to get 10 sessions with Inkblot. This is in addition to what they get in the paramedical. So we're really pleased with the quality of the service and the way that they help people to find a counselor in terms of matching them. And they've just been a tremendous resource for us. The other one is CBT. So probably Mind Beacon. We've heard a lot about that organization recently. This is more, I'd call like a digital workbook. And it's proven to be extremely effective for helping people deal with issues. And it really, I'd say, is attractive for people who maybe aren't even sure if they have a problem or not. And what it does is it allows them to be able to get the tools to be able to work through and diagnose and address issues with the support of a chat function where they're able to connect with a counselor or psychologist to get support. I could talk about a lot of these treatments in a lot more depth, but I would say all of them I think are really high quality, and we've been extremely pleased with them. Raf, I'll let you go over though in terms of kind of talking about some of the framing that we've had.
Thank you. So one of the pillars of our initiative is Stop the Stigma. So the goal here is to create safe and open space for dialogue. So we started doing that by inviting external speakers, and I think that was very effective for us, giving people external examples. So the poster that you see on the left, we invited Orlando da Silva, who shared his story of lived experience with mental illness. And what we noticed is over time, our people internally, our team members started raising their hands, offering support, volunteering to support organizing these events. And ultimately, some also volunteered to share their stories. So we've had a lot of story sharing. And in the fall, we organized a panel discussion. 5 of our team members openly shared with others their lived experience with mental illnesses. What you see on the right-hand side is an example of our Bell Let's Talk event from this year, January 2021. And it's really become a large, big event. So it's not just one day that we focus on talking about mental health. This year, it was a full week. And as you can see, it's a combination of internal and external speakers. We had our benefits provider speak about their therapies. We had a fantastic guest speaker who was talking about demystifying what therapy is. Our CEO was interviewed live on Mark Hannick's podcast. And it was also a fantastic opportunity for us to continue promoting the different benefits and supports that we have available for everyone at Maple Leaf Foods. Now, in terms of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this focuses purely on communication and engaging our employees, back in March and April 2020. So we decided to first focus on the mind and also focus on the body. And the goal here was really to, how do we support our people at this difficult time, and how do we provide people with some tips for coping during the pandemic? So we launched what we called Healthy Mind Speaker Series back in April last year. Then that continued into the summer. That's why the second logo has sunglasses, and we call that Healthy Mind Summer Series. And this event is actually offered up until today, and I will let Peter describe it in more detail in a second. And then in terms of the body, we launched a Move and Smile class. It's a live virtual class offered every Tuesday and Friday, 30 minutes, instructor-led. Anyone can join, any level of proficiency. And we stretch, we do yoga, a bit of mindfulness as well. We move and we smile at the same time. So Peter, you host You Are Not Alone, Healthy Mind Speaker Series. So I'll let you kind of describe those in more detail.
Yeah, I realize how long the pandemic has gone on when I see these pictures and what my hair used to be like. So there's been a change. Raf and I both have a background in terms of leadership development and designing training programs. And it's funny, but, often we make programs and they've got a lot of complexity and a lot of parts to them. This one is the simplest design. Our structure is that it's a 30-minute call. It's a webinar, so like this. We have a great speaker who comes on for 15 minutes, and then we have Q&A. So couldn't be a simpler design. And we laugh because here we've made all these complex things. We do a simple one, and we've never had better participation, better feedback, and I'd say better impact. And so I'm sure there's a lesson in there, certainly for us somewhere. But where we had intended to only do, maybe 5 to 10 of these sessions, we're coming up on 30 now. And the reason we do it is we continue to get so much attention. People feel like they love that the organization is investing in them, and we get a lot of feedback about that. We've positioned it that the topics are, I wouldn't say light, but they're really presented in digestible ways. So it doesn't feel like theoretical. It feels very practical. We encourage people to invite their families. And so we talk about things like isolation, or we talk about the importance of nutrition. We talk about, as Raf said, exercise. We've done a lot about how to care for your children during COVID, or dealing with your elderly parents. And now we'll get anywhere between 200 to 700 people attend these calls. So, in terms of kind of looking at what you might want to try, we found this to be really, really effective. And we continue to get positive feedback that it's a bright spot. We try and run them every other Wednesday at 1 o'clock. I think it's working. So because of the engagement. So I think Raf's going to cover how people find everything. Yeah.
Yes. One of our objectives is definitely ease of access of supports. So we wanted to ensure that those supports resources are just a click away. So what you see on the screen is our intranet called MyMLF. And what we've done is we created a page there, mental health resource site. So when you visit that site, depending on your location, you see the blue tiles at the bottom, depending if you're in Canada or in the USA. You can easily access from this website EFAP and the different virtual supports that Peter described, as well as all the other resources, all the video recordings of Healthy Minds, video recordings of any other event that we host, articles on wellness. And so this is purely for salaried employees. And what we do for hourly employees who do not have access to this site is we communicate with them through posters. But what we've also done for video recordings is we created a public YouTube channel. So all of our Healthy Mind speaker series are posted on YouTube for viewing for our hourly employees and their families. And Peter, you'll talk about how we measure the success of this initiative.
Yeah, it's been interesting. So we do a yearly engagement survey, which I'm sure most of you do at your organizations. And what we saw in our first year, we saw a very significant 13% increase from year to year in terms of the question, Maple Leaf supports my mental well-being. We were certainly encouraged by this. We know we have farther to go. We also got feedback from people in the survey about how they're having challenges with work-life balance. So we know that this question doesn't mean that everything is fine, but it was an indication in terms of that the initiatives that we were bringing to the table and bringing to people were being absorbed by people. They were resonating, and at least it was moving us in the right direction. So as I say, in no means would we be kind of sitting on our laurels here, but it was giving that kind of positive indicator, that at least we're rowing in the right direction. The other part I'd say in terms of some of the metrics, and this is more anecdotal, is participation from the mandatory training. When you're doing mandatory training on mental health, people are all entering it at different levels of background. Some people might have had education in this area, some might have lived experience, and some might be brand new. So we thought it was really important that we really do something foundational. And when we are doing something foundational like this, you know, and it's a 2 to 3 hour training program, and we made it mandatory, sometimes there can be a little bit of resistance to kind of attend mandatory training. And we were just extremely pleased with, you know, the way that people actually participated, the way that they engaged and brought real examples to the table. So, you know, if you're considering doing this type of training, you know, at least our own experience was, you know, our organization absorbed it. And then the other one is looking at participation, you know, in the different campaigns. And I think within our organization, we're at an interesting spot here because in a lot of different ways, we are doing work in the mental health, which impacts our culture. We've also been doing work now within diversity and inclusion, which also impacts our culture. And so I think it's been a really nice compliment that we've had things going on with our ERGs in different spaces. And then we had this work going on, and it was really complementary, where we are all talking about creating a safe space for dialogue, a safe space for people to be authentic in themselves. And I think, you know, when we look in terms of the different programs benefited each other as we move forward. Now, Raf, I don't think we're gonna, it's probably too early, but we did see some of our financial kind of results, which is giving some positive indicator in terms of we're starting to see things move in the direction that we thought they would in terms of impact on absenteeism or more short-term disability. We're not at the point to be able to kind of share as much here because we haven't even brought it, you know, to our own organization fully yet, but we're getting those reports now, and at least the early indicators are our expectations in terms of ability to self-fund seems to be coming true with early indicators. And with these ones here, what I'd say, you know, recall at the beginning when we were saying that one of our goals, you know, that we had here was the ability to actually have conversations and be able to interact with other organizations. And CAMH, what they did is they created this playbook, the mental health playbook for business leaders. It's a free online tool. I'd really encourage you to look for it. It gives it gives directions in terms of how to approach a strategy. And then it gives about 6 different case studies in terms of how organizations have implemented them. Maple Leaf was one of the featured case studies, and Bell is in there. I think GM or GE is in there. But it's a concise workbook. And I think, you know, if you're interested in learning more, you'd find it really helpful.
And I have the link to CAMH's website where you can download this playbook. I'll copy and drop this link in the chat for everyone.
Yeah,
and
so
with
I think
that,
we're now, oh, go ahead, Raf. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say with that, I think we'll turn it over to Sue.
Well, huge thank you to you both, Peter and Raf. That was a really great journey that you did take us on. Whirlwind, lots of great details, lots of great ideas. And so the questions are coming in for sure in both the chat as well as the question answers. So I've picked a couple because they just jumped out at me. So here's one. Since frontline managers serve as huge models for employees, how do you help frontline managers find the balance between disclosure and protecting their right to mental health privacy?
Raf, do you want to take that one?
So this is definitely through training. So our frontline leaders are also included in the mental health training for people leaders. So this is how we support everyone. How do you support your team members when they proactively share that they may experience a mental illness challenge? And what we teach is, or Morneau Chappelle, what we teach is a supportive coaching model in that training.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Peter.
No, to build on what Raf said, I think the essential element too is that we are trying to build trust between the employee and their manager. We are looking at having, in addition, so the person's manager is a key relationship that impacts kind of often their own productivity, but their own appreciation in terms of their role. The other part, though, is that we recognize sometimes it can be attractive to talk to someone who isn't your manager and who isn't HR. And this is where we're actually expanding the work. Raf is right now in the process of looking at doing training for a select group of our employees, probably around 40 of them, who have expressed interest to go deeper in terms of mental health training. And they're going to be mental health advocates that we'll have throughout the organization. So, when we talk about kind of the journey, that's the next step. It's an interesting program through Queen's, and we're hoping that we'll be able to do some of that work even within 2021.
Fantastic. And here's another interesting one. Someone was asking about the strategic goal of being a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. Have you done a risk assessment at first? And if so, are you sharing that information with employees?
So in terms of kind of the risk assessment, it is interesting. So what we found definitely in the work here is that we didn't have a lot of baseline data. And it's always that balance to say, to what extent do you get really robust baseline data before you make the decisions in terms of where you want to act. We felt comfortable between our employee surveys and then the focus groups that we did, that we had a pretty good understanding in terms of what the pain points were and what the needs were. And based upon that, we said, okay, let's start to do the design and move forward. That was a strategic decision that we made. I think what I would encourage organizations to consider is that chances are your organization probably is reflective, if it's of any size, of the greater population and that we live in. And so when you take the information that CAMH is able to provide in terms of the preponderance of mental health issues, in the broader population, and kind of extrapolate it down or distill it down to your own organization, that also gives you a lot of guidance in terms of saying, okay, where would we probably have issues? Where do our focus groups kind of reinforce that we have issues? And then where can we act? So we felt that we had enough information to lean in. I will say it was quite interesting, and I'll share a quick little story. When you're looking at changes to benefits, the last thing you ever want to do is pull them back. So when we went from $300 paramedical to $1,500 paramedical, we didn't want to say, 2 years in, wow, so many people needed this, we can't afford it. Sorry, everyone, it's back to 300. So that would be a disaster. So what we did is we did our best modeling. Like I said, we did some ROI work with Morneau. But then at the end, we had to make a lot of assumptions about projected utilization. And then we said we were going to be willing to live with the outcome of that. And so I think we had the benefit of having a supportive executive team who also agreed with that. And the other thing that I think was quite interesting was we didn't even know what good looked like on this one. Because what we said is, if we find that tons of people are using our paramedical, is that a great thing because we've reduced the stigma? So I think, yes, that is great. Or would it actually say, wow, we might have a toxic environment where there's so many people who are not well, why are they all using this benefit? We chose to lean into the first. But this is the interesting thing, I think, that happens when you're looking at this kind of space, is that we are moving, it's not like a lot of other HR or health and safety programs where we have a long history of benchmarks that we can compare to. You do find that you're going into more gray areas, and you have to really look at the principles that you want to achieve, because it might not be as clear a roadmap as we necessarily like.
Excellent, thank you, Peter. And I've got time for one last one before we wrap up today. We hear that there might be drawbacks to primarily using employee assistance programs as opposed to just support to everyone. Did you just want to wrap up some thoughts around that? Because you do both essentially.
Yeah. I think the employee assistance programs, like I say, are very good in terms of providing effective, quick support. But a lot of times when you're dealing with a mental health issue, there really is, personal hesitancy to be able to get help. And what we don't want is that people end up getting a little bit of support, and then they have to be kind of handed off into the community. And so our goal really is to train people. I mean, I say train, but to make it easy to say, if this is your issue, you could start here. If you think that you're going to and interested in longer support, go here. And we gave them basically that menu of options. And we always tell people, if something isn't working, don't be afraid to change and try something else. So we've really tried to take away a lot of the barriers that would prevent someone from trying CBT, or prevent a barrier from saying, why don't I try 3 ink blot sessions and see what it's like? So again, it's this idea of giving people choice, but not so much choice that it becomes intimidating. We still want them to feel coached and supported throughout it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Raf. We have many a good question and chat going on right now, and post-event, we'll get back to you as attendees with further information, because they were so amazing in terms of your engagement today. And what an important session to help organizations learn how to prioritize health, safety, and well-being from both a mental health and a wellness perspective. So we just encourage you to please continue to join us throughout the week. There's more happening on Wednesday and Thursday. In the meantime, stay safe and well. Visit ccuhs.ca and remember about Maple Leaf and their journey, and stay safe and well yourselves. Bye for now.